On the global stage, it's hard to find a closer relationship than that between China and Russia at this moment. Chinese President Xi Jinping is visiting Russia for the 8th time. How should the West view this? Meanwhile, China and Russia continue to deepen ties in various fields. What are they trying to accomplish? Welcome to The Point, an opinion show coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. Symbolic or substantive, the China-Russia relationship appears to be one of the closest in the world, but exactly how close? On Wednesday, Chinese President Xi Jinping visited Moscow for an 8th time, his most frequent foreign destination. This personal rapport between President Xi and Russian President Putin is seen as key to the mutual trust that has cemented bilateral ties. Yet beyond this personal friendship is the embrace of a multipolar world as a counterweight to American domination. So in what ways are Sino-Russian relations tightening, and what does it mean for the rest of the world? I'm pleased to be joined in the Beijing studio by Professor Cui Hongjian, Director of the European Department at the China Institute of International Relations. Professor Cui, thank you very much for joining The Point. So let's study the term a little bit. The Chinese love terms, especially long ones, and now the two countries are upgrading their relationship to a so-called comprehensive strategic partnership of coordination for a new era. That's, by the way, the only country with which China is forging this kind of relationship. In the past, previously, this was known as a comprehensive strategic partnership of coordination. So for our audiences who are not familiar with these kind of terminology, could you explain a little bit what exactly is new about this relationship now?
You just mentioned at the beginning how about this visit by Mr. Xi is a symbolic or substantive. So I think we need to understand how important for Chinese mindset for this historic sense. So I think this new definition of the bilateral relations between China and Russia with a new era. So I think it gives a very, very big sense of the history. As we know, in the past 70 years, as the two biggest neighbors, I think it's not so easy for China and Russia to get along with each other and to deal with some common challenges. And of course, I think the new definition of a new era means that now both China and Russia will be in a new stage, not only for the bilateral relations and also for the
both leaders.
For both the leaders,
well.
And also for the different political stages, and also for the new international environment.
But concretely, what is it going to do for both countries to have an upgrading of their bilateral relationship?
If we look at the various fields of cooperation between two countries, we can find out not only political, strategic. I think in recent years, a very, very important highlight for the bilateral relations would be the economic cooperation. As we understand.
So does it mean that this relationship will pivot more to the economic and trade relationship?
Sure. Comparing with the political and the strategic cooperation in the past, I think the economic cooperation would be a weak point for the bilateral relations. But in recent years, I think there are a lot of cooperation, economic, infrastructure, and some other. So I think it gives a more pragmatic approach to these relations.
Will there be concrete measures, concrete actions, or roadmap, let's say, as to how the two countries are going to upgrade their economic ties? Right now, we know bilateral ties has reached over 100 billion, which is already a milestone, right? Which was unthinkable just a couple of years ago. So now that they've done that, are there any concrete plans as to what to go next?
Sure. This time, both two leaders stressed the importance for both two governments to promote the living standard for average people, and not only some traditional cooperation in energy and some other. And this time, how about some new field? For example, the digital economy, and also some agricultural cooperation. As we know, in recent years, China become the biggest destination for the agriculture production export of Russia. But now this sector need to get some upgrade. So there will be some maybe deeper processing industry. So I think it gives a lot of potential for this cooperation.
Well, President Xi, ahead of his visit to Russia, he talked about President Putin being his best and bosom buddy. It's really rare for us to hear such a description, especially there's no one-off, right? He literally called him his best friend. How extraordinary is that? And what does that mean for, let's say, U.S. President Donald Trump?
So indeed, I think this very close personal relations between two leaders is a reflection of the relations between two countries. Because as I mentioned before, that as two biggest neighbors, how could get along with each other is a very, very, big test. And also, it could be a, experience with each other that we need to, for example, act as rational as possible. Because China-Russia relations, and especially the history between those two, in history, it's not similar with the relations between the United States and Canada. Those two countries also, they get development and also keep rising at almost at the same time. So how could deal with each other? How could to deal with some common challenges? So I think there will be some very useful experience, even for some other countries.
Well, we'll talk about the American perspective of the situation in just a moment. I have just been told that we're joined from Moscow by Alexander Lukin, head of the Department of International Relations at the National Research University Higher School of Economics. So, Professor Liu, thank you very much for joining me on this edition of The Point. So, how do you read the kind of urgency that is pushing the leaders of the two countries and the relationship of the two countries to go even higher? I mean, before this visit, the relationship was already very good. Last year when I was in Russia, we were talking about sky was the limit for China-Russia relations. So are we talking about outer space being the limit?
Звук пропал вообще.
Professor Lukin, let's speak English. Professor Lukin? Professor Liu Qing.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, do you hear me?
So
okay. Yeah, so what are...
Yes, can you hear
I
me?
wasted a very good question, but what are the factors that are driving Russia and China even closer based on their already very close relationship?
Yes.
Is it against anybody in the world or against, let's say, the United States or Europe?
Well, it's not against anybody as such, because the improvement of relations have started long ago, in the end of 1980s, I would say, when Gorbachev first went to, President of the Soviet Union, Gorbachev first went to China in 1989. And since that time, a lot of leaders changed and some political systems changed. But the tendency is still there. Russia and China are coming closer and closer together. This shows that there is a very fundamental basis behind this development. But on the other hand, as we can see, the United States policies, hostile policies against both Russia and China, kind of accelerates this process. And we can see that the cooperation became much deeper and much sooner than it could have happened otherwise after the United States used sanctions against Russia in 2014, and now when President Trump started his economic war, a trade war against China. Now in China, many people also understand that it's probably going to happen for a long time. So we have actually no choice but coming together and trying to make our two economies more independent from the West and from the United States, especially because the United States and their allies are using these trade issues for political reasons.
How can you convince to the world, Professor Liu Qing once again, that the closer relationship between China and Russia is going to be a force for good instead of a force for evil, for potential conflicts against the Western countries, let's say?
Well, that's a rather journalistic question. I'm not going to convince the world in anything, because this is not what researchers do. They just analyze things. And also the question of
so are you saying
it
could be? Are you saying it could?
We have a good good saying.
Go ahead.
In Russia, we say what's good for a Russian is death for a German, for example. So, but I'll put it in another way. Let's say that if you think that the world should be dominated by one power, namely the United States, that's what the United States elite is thinking, and they all share this opinion despite party differences there, then Russia and China are working for that. They're against that world, that kind of world, and they probably are going to undermine that kind of world. But the problem is that this world, what they call liberal world order, it doesn't really exist. They only want it to exist. But if you think that a good world is a multipolar world where every country respects each other, where they cooperate, where there is a pluralism of cultures and civilizations and ways of thinking, this kind of world Russia and China support, and they work for that kind of world.
Okay.
So in this kind of world, they are good forces. They are not revolutionary forces or revisionist forces. They are rather conservative forces. They want to maintain that kind of world.
Professor Cui, what is the Chinese perspective here? In your understanding, is the ball, let's say, the ball in the court of the Americans at this moment?
Indeed, I think for China and Russia, both countries try to insist the principle of bilateral relations. It's called the 3-no policy. Firstly, no alignment, and secondly, no confrontation. The third is no aim at the third party. So I think
when you talk about no alignment, what do you mean? Do you mean no alliance?
No alliance,
yes. Okay.
Yes.
So it means that they will not join hands to target any third country.
Indeed,
indeed.
I think it would be the Chinese the tradition of the Chinese foreign policy to keep an independent foreign policy. Even for China and Russia, now we are the closest friends and partners, but we don't try to take use of these relations to fight against with any third party, including the United States. I think for United States, I think it should be understandable that China and Russia now take consideration of not only the issue between China and the United States and between Russia and the United States, and mostly the China and Russia is taking more responsibilities for the more, favorable environment for development. For example, now this time for this St. Petersburg Economic Forum, the major topic would be the sustainable development.
Right.
And then how about for the human society and for the international community?
Okay.
So I think China and Russia should express more confidence, and not only just in a very realistic views about the fight with each other between big powers.
Okay, we're going to talk about that forum in the second half of this program. For now, I thank Professor Cui Hongjian, Director of the European Department at the China Institute of International Studies, and Alexander Lukin, Head of the Department of International Relations at the National Research University Higher School of Economics. You have been watching The Point with me, Liu Qing. Coming up after a short break, from 5G to soybeans, the Chinese and Russians are making deals. Should the West be concerned? Stay with us.